Welcome to Talent Hub Talk. I am Ben Duncan, and this is a place where prominent and inspirational figures from both the local ANZ and global Salesforce Ohana share their stories. This episode is sponsored by our friends at Flow Republic. Flow Republic is the elite Salesforce Academy, helping architects all over the world to realize their goal of becoming a Salesforce Certified Technical Architect. The success that architects are having with Flow Republic is incredible. So if you are on your journey to CTA, then I highly recommend checking out flowrepublic.com to understand how they can help you. In today's episode, I am joined by Satyashil Awadhare. Satya is a Salesforce Certified Technical Architect, currently based in Melbourne, Australia, but with imminent plans to relocate to the Bay Area. Satya talks us through his early career, how he explored work outside of the technology space, and how he ended up landing an opportunity as a Salesforce specialist. We discussed the role of an architect, how he found moving to a new country when he emigrated to Australia, and what initially got him started on his CTA journey. Satya talks us through what it's like preparing for the review board as a Salesforce employee, what the differences are between a Salesforce program architect role and a technical architect role with a Salesforce partner, and finally, he shares more about his next adventure, moving to the US as a Google employee. I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you do, please do subscribe for future episodes that are coming through. Satya, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for everything you do for the Salesforce ecosystem.
No, the pleasure is all mine, and exciting time in your career and life. You're about to head off to the US, so I've managed to squeeze this in just before you go and leave Melbourne.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot happening at the moment. We're packing all our stuff and getting ready for the big move, which is coming soon. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So look, we've got a lot to talk about, and we'll kind of touch on what's about to happen with your new role and things like that towards the end of the episode. But I always like to start and try to understand how you've got to this point. So let's start at the very beginning. And can you remember what you wanted to do, what your kind of aspirations were when you did grow up, when you were a child?
Oh, when I was a child. So you really want to go that back?
Let's go that far, and also then when you started kind of studying and things like that. But yeah, like in the early days, what were your aspirations?
Absolutely. So look, I when I was a child, I think I don't quite remember what I really wanted to be at the time. I do remember when I was like 10 or 12 years old, I wanted to be a pilot, but it was like more like a fantasy dream, really. I never pursued that path. But for me, coming from a middle-class Indian family, I come from very humble beginnings. My parents, especially my grandparents, came from extreme poverty, right? And for them, just focusing on education, working hard on what you do, and getting a job was the top priority. So for me, that was pretty much the path that I wanted to take. And when I was growing up, I do remember that I didn't know what I really wanted to do per se. I was absolutely clear at what I didn't want to do, right? And there is a funny story there on how I decided that anything related to art or painting was not my cup of tea, right? And the story really is that I was in, I think, grade 3 or grade 4, and there was this painting competition of all the kids, national-wide painting competition, right? 300, 400 kids were doing this painting thing, and I was part of it. And when the results were getting announced for that painting competition, there were only 2 kids that failed the entire competition, and I was one of them.
No way.
So grade 3, and I don't even know why would they fail just 2 kids out of 400 kids, right? But that was a realization for me, is that definitely anything related to art is not my cup of tea. So my path was pretty much defined that I would either be an engineer or a doctor. But then eventually, as I grew up, I think because I was good at math and everything, I think I chose engineering. And that's how I became I got into computer science as well, and we can talk about how I got into computer science too.
Sure. The worst thing about that story is that they actually told the people that failed that they were only 2 out of 300, 400 that failed. If you just got a fail, that was bad enough. But to be told that you failed and so did one other person. That's
Horrible.
pretty harsh.
That's horrible, actually. You imagine the confidence. My confidence completely shattered at the time, and I was what, like 7, 8 years old, and it was not a good thing to realize. But yeah, here I am.
So you gave up on the pilot dream and obviously decided art wasn't for you, and you did study computer science. So what was your kind of understanding of what you were getting into at that point? Like, what was the excitement from studying computer science?
Well, for me, I think getting into computer science was just happened by chance. I was lucky enough to be in the city. So I come from a city called Nagpur, which is right in the center of India, and it is home to one of the best engineering colleges in India. Right? So in India, there are these Ivy League colleges which are called IITs, the Indian Institute of Technology, and the next tier down are the NITs, which is what I did my engineering from. And it was in one of the cities that I grew up in. So for me, the pathway was very clear that I had to get into VNIT. It was called REC at the time, VRC at the time, and just get in there. And I was lucky enough to get into computer science as well. So I got into computer science by chance, and from there on, it was pretty much I wasn't very good at academics. I barely made through all the 4 years of engineering, and then managed to get into masters as well. So yeah, so it was pretty much going with the flow, and I landed in IIT doing my masters. Yeah.
So you say you weren't like top of the class. You weren't one of the top achievers through that time.
I was not, definitely not. I was struggling to get through engineering courses. It was hard to grasp some of the concepts as well because programming. I'd never done programming. It was only in second year of my engineering I started to write Pascal programming really. But eventually, over the time, as I studied and I got to know a little bit more. I did manage to get through it. But yeah, I think getting into IIT to do my masters was probably another achievement for me, which helped me then become a better computer science engineer. Really, yeah.
Did you ever consider quitting?
At the time, no, I don't think so. I never thought of quitting the field of work. I wanted to do something different, which I kind of tried in later years, but never computer science. It was like a challenge for me, right? Like for me, it was something new. I wanted to learn it, and even though it was hard initially, I put in my reps in there, and I got through it. Yeah.
And you mentioned off camera before that moving to the US, your son is really intrigued and inspired by Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
What was it back then that when you were doing computer science, was there something in the market or you saw something evolving that kind of inspired you and gave you that push?
Yeah. So I think this was what late 90s, so 98, 99 time frame, right? So this was when the internet was booming. And I think it was just before the dot-com crash as well in 2001, 2002. So I guess internet in itself was intriguing enough just to understand because it was going to disrupt the business models. I didn't know at the time that it would be so big, but I think that was one factor where you're seeing these websites come and go, which was quite intriguing at the moment. Yeah, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, so you did your masters. What did your early career look like after completing your masters?
Yeah, so I did my master's IIT from IIT Bombay, again in computer science, and I joined HP, Hewlett Packard, as a software engineer. At the time, because I had spent about 6 years in computer science, really doing really hardcore C++ stuff, for me, HP was the right choice because we are building like a file system on a server called Nonstop Systems, right? So it was really hardcore computer science engineering stuff, right? So that was my early part of the career, but then later on, I kind of made a career move. I moved back to my hometown to start a real estate company. which was completely different from what I had been doing for the last 10 years. And and I joined a company called Persistent Systems as a tech lead. And I was doing both things, real estate and my software job together.
So was the real estate business like a product? Were you using your computer science skills for that role, for that business?
Yeah, so that was the plan. And this was in 2005, 2006. So when I joined real estate, I wanted to see what can I bring from the technology world into an industry that is not, very tech savvy, really, right? Because it's a very, very old school kind of business, especially back in India. So I thought I can bring some of that modern technology to the industry. So, but when I joined that industry, I actually started a firm, a builder's firm myself, because I wanted to get the domain knowledge of that industry. So in order to digitize an industry, you need to understand the industry, right? So my initial part of that was just to, just get in the field and understand what it really takes to become a builder, really, right? So I started doing some real estate projects, really. And while it was just about time, I wanted to bring in some tech into my company. GFC happened, 2008, 2009, and everything crashed. Right, it was probably the biggest real estate bust in the entire world. And what happened because of that was I was a lot in debt, and it took me a while to get out of that debt. And by the time I was able to crawl out from that hole, it was too late, and I was fed up with it. So I kind of gave up on that.
And so you still had the job with Persistent Systems?
Yeah. So at the time, I was doing two jobs, really. In the morning, I used to do the real estate stuff, and in the evening, because we were working with US clients, I was doing the software stuff. So I was working two jobs, really, hustling.
Wow, and that's not getting much sleep either.
Not getting much sleep, but I was young at the time, so I was able to manage that. It was exciting. It was something completely different, completely new. So, and I like challenges, right? Like I like to go and do something completely radical that somebody has not even thought about, and try and accomplish that. That's pretty much my life. A series of challenges that sometimes I fail, but sometimes I succeed, right? So that's what it is. Yeah.
So do you ever miss your building days?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. See, the thing about the real estate industry is there's something tangible you see, right? So even when I go back to my hometown now, I see the buildings that I've built, and I feel proud looking at that. Even though it was so stressful to go through that phase, I think there's some sense of fulfillment that you get when you see something really tangible in front of your eyes. That's something that you built, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Persistent Systems, was that a Salesforce role?
Not initially, actually. So initially, I was part of. So Persistent Systems in initial days was a outsourced product development kind of company, right? So so they used to have projects from, say, Oracle or HP to build product itself. So I was part of that team initially. But then eventually I moved into the Salesforce ecosystem, and there's a funny story there on how I got into Salesforce ecosystem, which you can talk in a minute. But so went into building file systems, and then eventually moved into Salesforce.
And in terms of that transition, then, so if you can tell us like how that came about, but also what your first thoughts were, because you were doing a hardcore computer science, software engineering, like building stuff from the ground up, right?
Yeah.
To then going into a Salesforce role where a lot of things are built for you. So it's not always the most favorable environment for a true software engineer, or wasn't back then for sure.
Absolutely, and I was actually very hesitant. So the story, actually, how I got into Salesforce was my VP at the time. I had taken a break from real estate and everything, because after the bust, after the GFC, and I was trying to find meaning of life, and was trying to get my head cleared out of all the mess that I had gotten into, right? And then I came back, and my VP comes to me and says, "Hey, is this technology called Force.com? It's cloud based. Are you interested?" And my first reaction to that was no. this is application software. I don't deal in application software. Give me something hardcore to build, right? Like systems programming, something low level. And he said, why don't you go and take a look? And then we can chat tomorrow. So next day he pings me and says, oh, what do you think? And I'm like, I'd spent about a couple of hours looking at just the website and some videos and everything. And I'm like, it looks interesting. The whole cloud computing paradigm shift is excellent. It is something new to the industry. All I said was that, right? And then then he invites me into this customer meeting the next day, as and introduces me as a Force.com expert. So here I am in a customer meeting as a Force.com expert, answering questions on the Salesforce platform day one, and I had no clue whatsoever, right? So it was quite interesting, and that's how I got into Salesforce. And I think the next 6 months to 1 year was really, really interesting because I got to form my own team. And it was a very similar kind of struggle that in the mornings and during the day, we were learning about the platform. And in the evening, we were getting on customer calls and delivering the project for them. So,
wow.
And then we got ourselves certified and everything. It was quite challenging, but very, 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 very interesting. Yeah, so that's how I got into Salesforce. Yeah.
Crazy. And just you mentioned always taking on challenges, like pushing the boundaries and doing things that other people hadn't done. Has that kind of been a guiding principle of yours from your early career? Like, were there things that you were taught, or you saw other people doing, and you thought, right, I'm going to make a career by following these principles and going in this direction?
Yeah, you could probably say so. I think working hard, as I said before, I've never been one of the most brightest students in the class, right? So for me, the tool that I have is working really hard. I put in the effort and set a goal and achieve that. That has been really my guiding principle when it comes to my career or anything for that matter, right? So for me, life has always been a set of what's next. So it's just set of challenges in terms of, okay, I've come here, what next? And I keep asking that question again and again to myself, and that is what has landed me to where I am right now. But you can say that has pretty much been the guiding principle. Yeah.
It's important, though. I think it's important to have a goal, but it's also important to kind of, as much as possible, master the level you're at before you progress, right? So, because if we look at the Salesforce ecosystem now, there's so many people that don't have years of experience, but are calling themselves an architect, or might not have worked on big programs of work, but present and want the highest salary because that's just the way the market is. So how did you make sure that you weren't pushing ahead of yourself? Like, if you are motivated by achieving the next step and goals, like, how did you go from being an engineer to an architect and then progressing from there by making sure that you had covered the bases, I guess?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good question, and you're absolutely right, especially with the way this ecosystem is exploding at the moment. Everybody's an architect, right? And everybody demands the salary of an architect without the relevant experience. I guess in my case, when I was initially introduced to the platform, I was completely new to it. So I started right from the bottom. I wanted to understand the platform, and it was changing as well. So it wasn't like you understand something and you're done, right? It's constantly evolving as well. So that's something that you have to do in terms of you should know enough of it to be able to say that you are an architect or you are a team lead there, right? Because you get put into some conversations with customers where you are supposed to present those skills as well. So for me, I wasn't actually targeting anything. I was just putting in my work and making sure that I get the relevant experience before I could call myself an architect or anything. Even for a long, long time, even when I used to introduce myself to customer, I would just introduce myself as an engineer. That's it. I wouldn't call myself as an architect or anything. I'm just a software engineer who's learning new stuff. That's how I used to introduce back in the day. Yeah.
Do you think the role of an architect has changed then over the years? Because Salesforce wasn't as broad back then. So I guess like you could be an architect maybe earlier, perhaps, I'm not sure, but that would be, I guess, a guess. But now that the platform is so broad and there's so much complexity, and there are so many different reasons why a project can be complex. But there are people that are calling themselves architects. It might have happened back then as well, but so soon. So, like, is it easier to be an architect now, or was it easier back then?
Well, I think the architecture principles haven't really changed. If you look at some good architects, back in the day, those architects were also good, right? So I don't think the architecture itself has changed. It has probably broadened a bit in scope, especially when it came to Salesforce architects, right? But even if you meet like the CTAs back in the day, right? The early batch of CTAs, they still had those 7 or 8 domains that you had to present as an architect, right? And that's true even now. It just means that right now there are more products where you have to educate yourself on as an architect, right? So I don't think necessarily it means that it's become harder or easier. I think it's just that the scope has increased a bit. And that's true with the CTA exam as well. Like previously, the CTA exam was very much limited to core, whereas nowadays it's expanded into other regions like Marketing Cloud and Einstein and so on and so forth. So I think still the guiding principles for being an architect are still the same.
And you then moved to Australia. That was kind of your next career move,
Yeah.
I believe. So coming from working offshore and working, in a delivery team and having client engagement, but not like being in front of a customer day to day, was that a challenge, or were there other challenges you faced when you first came to Australia and were operating as an architect?
Yeah, yeah. So that was another challenge. That what next that led me to Australia really, and for me, as you rightly said, when you're in the offshore end, even though your role can be customer facing, but you are customer facing in front of a screen and not in person in room with a customer, right? That's quite different from being in a room with senior members, senior business stakeholders, and technology stakeholders, and whiteboarding stuff, right? So when I came here, I think that was probably the biggest thing for me, where I felt like I was exposed. You know, um, the other aspect that I found most challenging when I came to Australia was when we are back in India, and I shouldn't be saying this because I was in that part of the world for a long, long time. We are pretty much yes people, right? We say yes to everything for some reason. I don't know why. And and we are not very good at saying no, or we're not very good at saying, okay, I don't know the answer to this, but let me get back and I'll come back to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I came from India to Australia and I was in a room, and if I didn't know anything, that saying no, I don't know the answer to this was probably very hard for me to do. So over the years, then I trained myself in saying, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say you don't know, because you won't know everything, right? Especially with Salesforce, there's so many things. Even after being a CTA, I don't feel confident enough that I know everything about the platform. It's so massive. So I guess that was another challenge. Obviously, other challenges were just the language is a bit different, even though it's English. There's a bit of slang. So
Yeah.
understanding what people were saying initially was a bit tough. You had to know the AFL game, which I didn't at the
Yeah.
time, so I had to learn the
Especially in
game.
Melbourne.
In Melbourne, yeah. I mean, every meeting, the pre-meeting is about AFL, right? So you need to know, you need to be associated with the team, and you need to know what the latest game was. So that was a bit of a challenge as well. But overall, I think it was a great move for me to move, especially after the mess that had happened in the real estate world. That was a good change for me to come to Australia. Yeah.
Just on that point around kind of learning to say no, and being confident enough to say, I don't know the answer, but I'll find out. Was that something that you realized you weren't comfortable doing, or was it something you got coached on, or you dropped the ball on something and then you realized, like, actually, I should have just said I didn't know the answer to that?
Yeah, I think there were a few instances where I was just blabbering around when I didn't know the answer, and then I met a few good architects, right? CTAs actually, and they were very confidently saying, oh, "I don't know." And it was quite a shocker to me. And I'm like, you're a CTA. How can you say that you don't know? So it was quite a realization for me. And that's how you learn, right? You hang around with good people, and then you learn from them. So that was probably it for me. Yeah.
So I guess seeing these CTAs in action might have given you that kind of trigger to then set your next challenge, which was going down that path. But can you remember what your motivation was for the CTA journey, and also how did the journey play out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk about the CTA journey. So for me, I think when I was back offshore, CTA was never on my radar at all. And I don't know if there are any listeners from India. I think that shouldn't be the case. I think it's very much possible to be in India and get your CTA. If you see the percentage of CTAs that come out of India is actually relatively very low, because a lot of people who are really talented and have the caliber never think about going for a CTA back in India. So I would say, if anybody is listening, and you should definitely think about getting your CTA. Now, for me, CTA actually became a goal when I've met my first CTA, when I was with System Partners. His name was John Davis, and he's with the Salesforce UK practice now. Excellent guy, terrific person, very humble and very knowledgeable. And I met him, and when I met him, I was like, yeah, this is what someone I want. I would like to be like this person, right? So that's where probably when I first thought of that I could also be a CTA, when I met John. And then over the period of time, I met a lot of CTAs who are truly inspirational, like Olivier, for example. I met him at Telstra, and he was phenomenal. So over the period of time, it kind of solidified that I had to get my CTA done. And at the time, I think this was 2016, CTA was not the same format as it is today. It was a three-stage exam, but there was a multiple choice exam. So I actually attempted the multiple choice exam in 2016 without any preparation, and I passed it. And I was like, wow, if I can pass it without preparation, then I can probably take the board. Thank God I didn't take the board at the time, because I was not prepared at all. But I actually seriously started my CTA journey when I joined Salesforce, and really in 2019.
So you joined Salesforce having passed the multiple choice, and then kind of kicked on from there.
Yeah. So in Salesforce, there is a process. You just can't go and appear the board. You need to go through a CTA boot camp. So even though if you have passed the multiple choice, you still have to go through the boot camp to actually appear the board, because there is a internal process that you need to follow. So for me, and get to that internal process, to the boot camp, you need to get all your certifications. And by that time, the CTA format had changed as well. So then I went through the domain learning phase again. Got all my internal badging, PA badging process is what it's called internally within Salesforce. And then I went in the CTA bootcamp and went through that process. Yeah.
So when obviously it's a broad process, and there's lots to know, but there's obviously areas of focus, right? So now you say I think 7 domains, but
Yeah.
where were you kind of at? What was your biggest challenge out of the 7? Like, which area did you kind of find the most resistance when you were trying to learn it?
Yeah. So I think when I was doing my CTA, the first step of the CTA prep is really the domain preparation, right? Where you're preparing these individual domains: identity being one, integration, security, data management, governance. For me, the most challenging bit was identity management.
That's quite common, right?
It's quite common, and the reason why it's so common is you don't get to work on actually implementing identity solutions in your day-to-day life. You just assume that there is an identity solution and it solves everything. All you have to do is enter your password and magic happens, right? That's
Yeah.
how that's the nature of the identity system. But when you're preparing for CTA, you need to understand what actually happens behind the scenes, right? And that requires you to actually go pretty detailed into that topic. Maybe even try out a few things, like you need to really understand what the difference between SAML and OpenID Connect is, and when to use what, etc., right? So the domain preparation for me, the most challenging was identity and maybe governance to a certain extent. But then the second phase of the CTA is really actually the ability to solve your scenario within that 3 hours and then present it and then Q&A and prepare for Q&A, right? That is probably the most challenging bit of that exam. It's if you give an architect 6 hours to solve the scenario, they would be fine. It's the
Yeah.
time pressure of solving in 3 hours is probably the most challenging bit of the exam. So that was another challenge, which actually was solved by practice. So me, Gaurav, Sood, we were all preparing together for the exams, and we used to present the scenarios to each other. So that helped as well. And there was a lot of coaching internally from Salesforce. So if anybody listening here to this podcast, I would say I'll go on record and say that probably if CTA is your goal, then you should probably join Salesforce because that's where you'll get the most support to get CTA. And I know there are other organizations now like Flow Republic, which are really helping a lot of external candidates get through the CTA. Back in the
Yeah.
day, there was no Flow Republic. So back in the day, it
Mm-hmm.
was only Salesforce. And that's why you see so many CTAs coming out of Salesforce as well, because there's such a stronger support
Yeah, absolutely.
to get your CTA.
It's interesting what you said around the preparing, and you've got 3 hours, and if you gave someone 6 hours, they would be okay. I spoke to someone recently that had been preparing for the review board, or preparing for the first the first round, which is like a mock now, right, to see if you're ready for the. And they were saying that in their preparation in their company, it's kind of a bit loose in that you don't have 3 hours. Like it might be split over 2 days. So you get given the requirement, and then that night you solution, and then you come back and then you present, and they found that actually that for them it's like you need to practice as if it's like match day. You need to be in the zone, and it has to replicate exactly what it's going to be like on the day, because if you don't do that, you'll come unstuck when you get to that moment. Like everything that it's like intentional practice, right? It's preparing as if it is the review board every single time.
100%. I would completely agree that. So the way so when I'm coaching anybody for CTA, I say that there are three distinct phases for CTA prep. The first one is the domain prep, which we spoke about. The second phase, which is actually the presentation prep or the exam prep, is it has to be exactly how like the exam, like 3 hours for solving the problem, 45 minutes to present it, and 45 minutes of Q&A. And the more you practice that exact same format, the better it is for you, because then it's not new, right? So if you practice solving a scenario overnight, it's not the same thing, because it's the time management that is the hardest part of this exam. It's not. So CTA stops being a technical exam after a point in time, because you prepare so much that you know each and every technical details about the Salesforce platform in order to pass the exam, right?
Sure.
But then the ability to solve it in 3 hours and present it in 45 minutes, and then do a Q&A which is so concise and precise is only comes with practice, and it's a completely different skill, which is what you need to learn.
So if you think about when you first started practicing and with Gaurav and the team internally started doing these mocks and presenting, like how much better were you at the end? Like what was the difference between start and finish? Were you like two different people?
Heaps. Because we go through, like, internally within Salesforce, there are almost 10 to 11 scenarios that we have to go through in order to finish the boot camp. And these are all mock scenarios. So imagine you are appearing the board almost, and some of them are full scenarios, some of them are short scenarios, some are long, and some of them are full scenarios. So it's almost like you appeared the board a few times before the CTA in charge, who's Khalid, can say that yes, you're ready for appearing the board. So you would have gone through a lot of practice. You would have a framework in terms of how you want to approach the scenario, how you want to do your presentation, what are the things that you want to practice more on, etc., etc. You would have done it a few times. So that definitely helps. And I'd recommendation is do the practice, like, even if you fail, that's fine. but do the practice the way the format is, the actual exam format is. That will help you get in the zone, really.
Now, I know this will be hard to answer because it's like hypothetical, right? But do you think you felt more pressure sitting the review board as a Salesforce employee than you would have if you were representing a partner?
We did, because the judges are people you know. So there is a bit of a judgment there, right? Like when you're presenting to someone you know, you feel a bit of, and if you fail and if you don't do well, you feel like, yeah, probably it's better to present to strangers rather than to someone you know, really. So
Yeah,
there is a little bit of pressure there as a Salesforce employee. But look, I think there are pros and cons as well. Right? As a Salesforce employee, you get a lot of support as well.
sure.
So if you're lucky, you might get a judge who you would have seen in one of the mocks. So you know their style, you know their questioning, what kind of areas they kind of deep dive into. So there is a little bit of added advantage you can get by doing that. But having said that, it's all the same for everybody, right? The judge will focus only on the areas that you're presenting. So it's not like you would know exactly what they're going to ask. It will all be scenario specific anyway. So.
Yeah, and people fail, like people within Salesforce fail. So yeah, I think it goes to show, you know, the bar is the same whether you're internal or external.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just in terms of that pressure, I can imagine, because everyone kind of within Salesforce would know you're going for it, and you know, you'll be getting questions straight afterwards, like how did it go, and things like that. And yeah, if you're an external, you just rock up and yeah, it's a bit different, I guess. But yeah, on that point around the comparison, so you've worked for external Salesforce partners, you know, system partners you mentioned before being one of them, and obviously you've worked as a program architect within Salesforce. So for anyone that doesn't really understand the differences between what a program architect does within Salesforce and what a technical architect does for a partner, what would you say the main kind of things are?
Yeah, this is a very good question, actually, and I've been asked this question before, and the way I've answered it previously is that I give an analogy, right? So imagine that you're given a big piece of land, let's say 100 square kilometers of land, and you're asked to design a city, right? So as a city planner, what would be your main things that you would want to solve for? You would want to see that the road transportation is right, the rail transportation is right, the sewers are right. That there are enough bridges. If there is a sudden rainfall, your city is able to manage, right? So that's the role. The city planner role is kind of like a program architect, where you're looking at a project end to end. So you're looking at how does your city integrate with other cities? So integration patterns. Is there enough large data volume management onto your project? Have you looked at identity solutions? So you're looking at a project more from solving a business problem, and then looking at from these various different domains. So that's the role of the program architect, really. End-to-end picture, broader vision, and solving for big ticket items, privacy, compliance, security, etc., etc. So that's program architect. Technical architect, the similar role in the same analogy would be like a home builder. A home builder, very, very focused on building a house. They want to make sure that the house is right, the ceiling is right, the walls are right. So technical architect is focused on the project, on one project within the broader vision, and they're making sure that you're following the best practices on the platform, you're using the right Apex design patterns, you're reviewing the code, etc., etc. So that, and both roles are important, right? They have a purpose. Both roles are meant to solve for a project, but they're quite different. There is a bit of an overlap, I would say, when it comes to like best practices and all, but slightly different in terms of scope on what you are really looking at. I don't know if this analogy makes sense, but
No,
that's.
I get you. And do you see that? Because I've seen like program architect roles coming up external from Salesforce. So, you know, companies will be implementing Salesforce themselves and hire a program architect on contract, as an example. Or like, do you think that title kind of translates and that's the same role that gets played in and outside of Salesforce, or is it, you know, different?
Yeah. So Salesforce program architect, I think is a bit different because employees of Salesforce are very close to the product team, right? So they know what the roadmap of what a particular product looks like. So
Hmm.
if there's a program architect from an external partner versus a Salesforce program architect, I think the main difference is the access to the product team, direct access to the product team,
Yeah.
which is quite important in that role because there may be certain features, beta features, or some roadmap items that the customer may want. And a program architect, while they can look at architectural best practices, they would not have direct access to the product team within Salesforce. So that probably is one key difference between these two roles. But apart from doing just architecture stuff, pure architecture stuff, I would say there could be some similarities there.
Hmm. And then we've touched on your career in terms of the you've worked in consulting, you've worked for Salesforce, and up until recently you hadn't been on the customer side.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about your latest challenge and the journey that you're on now, and what was it that really excited you about going into to Google, but actually working for a customer?
Yeah. So, as you said, I've been working in the partner ecosystem. I worked for the mothership Salesforce for a long time, and the only role that I had not done was being customer and being the lead person at a customer end. So that was exciting. So I thought I should check that. But leaving Salesforce was not easy because especially after getting your CTA and working for Salesforce, which is an excellent company to work for, finding a similar kind of company which has similar values, which is big enough to then apply my skills or my learnings. There are not too many companies in the world that I can think of. Uh, Google being one of them. There are a few other companies, and that's it, right? So that list is pretty small. For me, luckily, again, luck has played a very important role in my life. The Google opportunity came through, and I always wanted to go to the Bay Area. That was always on my bucket list. So it came through. I went through the interview process. It all went smoothly. Google was ready to move me to Bay Area. So they made the process very easy, the transition very easy as well. So everything was falling in place, and I think Google is big enough, especially Google Play, where I'll be part of, impacts billions of people on a daily basis. So whatever I do or decisions that I make is going to impact billions of people, which is quite fulfilling, in my opinion, at this point in time. And I think it's a big enough challenge for me to actually, conquer at this point. And yeah, and we're looking forward to the Bay Area, to moving to the US.
And that point, it brings you back nicely actually to you were talking about working in real estate, being a builder, like being able to visually see something you've built, I guess
Yeah,
is similar, right, in this world, because the amount of people and how visible the products are that are being used by people day to day from Google. And like you said, there'll be like millions and millions and millions of people that will utilize products from the stream in which you work. So yeah, I guess you can now see the output as well as the output from the work you've done.
absolutely. Yeah. And that's quite fulfilling. We would whatever we do in Salesforce. And Google is a big customer. There are a lot of parts within Google that uses Salesforce as a platform. And Google Play is one of the key divisions that uses Salesforce as well. So it's big enough. It has much broader impact, and it is going to put my skills to test.
And just in terms of the Bay Area, what are you said it was a goal to live there. Like, what are you most excited about being embedded in that kind of tech community?
Yeah, so Silicon Valley, that area from San Francisco to San Jose, that that patch, I think, is fascinating, right? When I open my app and I look at all the apps on my phone, I reckon every app that I see, except for the banking apps here, all apps have come from that small piece of land in the world, and the world is so big. So clearly, they're doing something right. There is a concentration of talent in that region, and for me, being part of that um, is has always been exciting, and I've always had that in the backdrop somewhere that at some point I'll go there and live and see what the fuss is all about. How do the people there think? Can I become like them? So that's pretty much what I'm looking forward to, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exciting times, and I think it's going to be an incredible journey, and I would love to have you back as a guest in the future to hear more about what life in San Fran is like.
I would absolutely love to come back, and it's a big move as well. Packing furniture and packing boxes is no fun. Especially you get to know what kind of a hoarder you are, and it turned out to be that I have some pair of shoes right now with me which I brought here from India.
No way.
Never worn them in the last 8 years, and they are in my cupboard right now, just sitting there for 8 years.
Maybe it's time to get them out and put them on.
Probably, yeah, or get rid of them. Get rid of them, right? So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening on personal end, on professional end. And I would love to come back on your podcast. Absolutely.
And if any listeners wanted to reach out and just pick your brains on one of the topics we've discussed, or get some advice about they might be in a similar position to one of those steps in your journey in the past, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, I would say. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If they send me a connection request, I pretty much accept everybody's connection requests. I try and respond to messages as much as I can. There's a whole heap of messages that I'm getting these days, so I'll definitely try and respond if somebody wants to reach out. I'm not so active on Twitter, but I do have a Twitter account as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of Talent Hub Talk. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love it if you could subscribe and also leave a short review. We're keen for this podcast to reach as many people in the Salesforce ecosystem as possible, and your reviews will help us do that.